Good evening. This is Jim Werbenow, and thank you for viewing my newest video, which is actually a reworking of one that I did in Columbus, Ohio in June 2025 at the Origins Game Fair, on General Mark Wayne Clark, the problematic general. I think problematic is a good term for him. This is based on that presentation from a few weeks ago with a little bit of expansion, as I was really on a hard limit there as far as time and also what I could cover. So I did put a little more in, and you'll see it at the end, as well as some notes on games that cover his battles in Italy, and also some notes on sources. So please stick with me to the end. I think that you're going to find this enlightening and hopefully a little entertaining. One of the good introductions to General Clark comes from another general named Daniel Bolger, who was a cadet at the Citadel after Clark's time as the superintendent. And Bolger went on to become a lieutenant general and a military historian, and he's now teaching at North Carolina State University in Raleigh. And in his book called The Panzer Killers, The Untold Story of a Fighting General and His Spearhead's Charge into the Third Reich, Bolger writes a history of the division and partial biography of its commander, General Maurice Rose. Now, General Rose was Jewish, but he was also kind of in stealth mode. He never really talked about his heritage, even though his father retired and then went to school to become a rabbi. And in this context, General Bolger recalls a meeting he had as a cadet with General Clark. 3 cadets went to see Clark. A faculty officer, a Marine veteran of Vietnam, gave us ground rules. The general will talk. You'll listen. If you get to ask a question, be careful. Do not mention Salerno, the Rapido River, Casino, or Anzio. Above all, don't ask the general about his Jewish mother. His Jewish mother? I'd never heard about that. Still, I'd been a cadet long enough to know how to keep my mouth shut. That I could do. The story of Mark Wayne Clark starts in Sackett's Harbor, New York in 1896, when he was born to an Army colonel named Charles R. Clark and his wife, Rebecca Ezekiels Clark. Now, when he got to West Point, he was very conspicuously baptized as an Episcopalian. According to Rick Atkinson, this was for career purposes. That he felt that Episcopalianism was the religion that could do him the most good as a soldier and would be the best for his career. Sort of a flag of convenience, if you will. When he did graduate, he did so in 1917 and was near the bottom of his class. But he had the right friends, especially Dwight David Eisenhower and other future generals who would be his comrades, his colleagues, and his superiors in World War II. He entered the infantry but was severely wounded in France and accordingly moved into supply. Between the wars, he attended the infantry school and then the General Command and Staff College, which would be expected of an officer on the rise, and he mainly served in staff positions during the interwar period. When World War II got closer, he assisted General Leslie McNair at the General Headquarters, which was then renamed the Army Ground Forces, in building and training Army units for World War II. So this was actually, I believe, his best contribution to World War II. It was a matter of organization and setting up the process by which divisions were organized. In the first years of the war, one of the first things that happened for Clark was that he was assigned to command the U.S. Army Second Corps in Great Britain. And there he was able to gain the regard of Winston Churchill, another influential friend, as, quote, our American eagle. He was then redirected to the Mediterranean to train soldiers for Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, a task at which I would say he was pretty well suited. In this time, he made a covert mission to North Africa to try to bring French forces over to the Allied side before the invasion. And although that was basically a failure, he ended up negotiating with Admiral Jean-Francois Darlan after the invasion to bring the French over to the Allied side. From the start of Operation Torch, the French had been resisting the Allied invasion as though they were the enemy. And this was not the optimal outcome as far as the British and the Americans were concerned. But they were fortunate that Darlan was in North Africa at the time. He was in Algiers, where he was visiting his son, who was dying of polio. And Clark was one of the negotiators, along with George Patton, who helped get Darlan on side in supporting the Western Allies. And here we have him pictured, second from right. Dwight Eisenhower is on the far left. Admiral Darlan in civilian dress, second from the far left. Then General Clark. And on the right we have Robert Murphy, who was the leading American diplomat in North Africa and was also running covert operations to bring French officers over to the Allied side, while also conducting relief operations to bring American food to the people of North Africa. So this was basically the team that was most important. The only one missing here is General Patton. In January 1943, General Clark was named commander of the Fifth Army in Morocco. Their initial mission was to guard French North Africa, now under Franco-British American control, from a possible invasion from Spanish Morocco. Spain was very pro-Axis at this point, officially a neutral, not really, but officially they were neutral and was regarded as a potential threat, definitely a potential active ally of the Germans. Now, the 3rd of September 1943, Fifth Army was assigned to invade Italy at Salerno, which they did. And unfortunately, this was a very, very near-run thing to steal from the Duke of Wellington. And it was a very close call with defeat, where a panzer counterattack was able to exploit a gap between the British beachheads in the north and the American beachheads in the south, as you see in the map to the right. And this was one of the few amphibious operations in World War II that the Axis actually could have won. Following this, there were costly battles on the Rapido riverfront south of Cassino. On the 20th and the 22nd of January 1944, and Clark was cleared of wrongdoing by a congressional investigation, but the 36th Infantry Division and its officers disagreed emphatically. And to this day, many people in that division still regard Clark as something of a villain, at least uncaring and incompetent. That this was the Texas National Guard, and based on the design of their shoulder patch, they were called the T-Patchers. And part of the T-Patchers' identity really is hostility towards Clark, and based on the futility of this attack and the high casualties. Clark's most controversial decision was probably the bombing of Monte Cassino on the 3rd of February, 1944. This was demanded by the Supreme Commander for the Mediterranean Theater, the British General Sir Henry Wilson, also known as Jumbo. He was not a little man. And Clark carried this out reluctantly. One of the problems here is, first of all, it's quite doubtful that there were any Germans in the Abbey when Wilson and Clark ordered it destroyed. Secondly, by destroying the Abbey, what they created was a huge pile of rubble that, when the Germans moved in, became a lot more defensible. They weren't doing themselves any favors any more than the Germans did when they destroyed Stalingrad and created a giant field of rubble that made the urban fighting all the harder. Now, this followed a second amphibious operation on Clark's watch, which was at Anzio on the 22nd of January, 1944. The Corps commander, John Lucas, consolidated the beachhead instead of driving for the Alban Hills in Rome, which was actually his mission. Instead, he decided to play it safe, play not to lose instead of playing to win, and you could say he ended up losing. The landing area was contained by the Germans and counterattacked, and it became what the Germans called the world's largest self-contained prisoner of war camp. And it stayed that way until the 5th of June, 1944, when the Allied troops finally did break out of their beachhead. Another controversy involved the so-called race for Rome. This followed the Allied breakout on the 5th of June, 1944, and Clark had two choices. As ordered by General Wilson, he could have turned right and cut off the German army in Italy, forcing its surrender, in which case Rome probably would have fallen without much ado, with nobody to defend it. Or he could drive on Rome as the first priority. The city was basically undefended, it was vulnerable, it was there for the asking. And adding to this equation is the fact that Clark wanted headlines, and like a lot of generals, he was a very vain man, and the vanity got the better of him. He wanted to take Rome from the south, something that hadn't been done in centuries. And he wanted to be its liberator and do this before the headlines were dominated by the landings in Normandy, which he knew were coming. So I think this is a case of personal interest getting the better of his strategic sense. And I don't see very much in the way of reason for this, anything concrete. I don't see any excuses, really. But he was insubordinate towards his superior, his chain of command. He drove on Rome for his own reasons. And he failed to inflict a devastating attack on the Germans. Now, remember, in this context, Germany had just had two armies destroyed, cut off and forced to surrender. First, there was the 6th Army in Stalingrad. Then there was the 10th Army in Tunisia, along with the remnants of Panzer Army Africa and the Italians, both of which were devastating losses to the Germans and could rightly be determined as turning points in the war. Stalingrad gets the press, but Tunisia was in some ways just as much or more damaging to the organization of the German army. Clark turned down a chance to make it 3 for 3. And I think of all the controversies, maybe Cassino stands out in many people's minds, but I think the race for Rome was the worst. And I have a very hard time justifying it. He could have gone to Rome, but he would have been second page below the fold instead of dominating the headlines, which is not exactly a military consideration. The aftermath was that the 10th Army was able to escape to fight another day in the north. and were able to progressively fight a fighting retreat up the boot until final surrender. This didn't happen to be that way. Clark missed an opportunity to liberate more of Italy and do it sooner, as well as bagging the German army. And he was never sanctioned for his disobedience. Instead, he was promoted to command of a new army group, the 15th, in December of 1944, while Wilson was transferred to represent Britain with the combined chiefs of staff in Washington upon the death of Sir John Dill, who was not especially liked by Churchill. He was removed as chief of the Imperial Defense Staff and commander of British forces overall, and replaced by Sir Alan Brooke, later Lord Alan Brooke, and basically exiled to Washington. But Dill was exceptional at working with Americans and was really an icon for me of coalition warfare. And he was so respected by the United States. He was buried in Arlington National Cemetery and is also honored there by an equestrian statue, which is unheard of for a foreign officer at Arlington. He had some later career highlights. First of all, he was commander of American occupation forces in Austria following the surrender of Germany in 1945. This was when Austria was divided, like Germany, into occupation zones covered by each of the major allies. And it was in this period that he had his first interactions with stubborn and difficult Soviets. Something he talks about in his memoirs, Calculated Risk. He was definitely frustrated, and he found these guys to be faithless and intransigent negotiating partners. Later in 1952, he took command of the United Nations forces in Korea during the trench warfare phase, and he was the Allied commander who signed the armistice to end the war, at least the shooting war, in 1953. And he retired on Halloween 1953 from the United States Army. He went on from then to be superintendent of the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, where General Bulger met him from 1953 to 1965. He died on the 17th of April, 1984. Now, here's my personal professional assessment of General Mark W. Clark. I think he was a lot smarter than his West Point standing would indicate. That just because he graduated towards the bottom of the class doesn't mean he's a damned idiot. And his work on staff positions and organizing the United States Army for World War II indicates this. He was also politically astute. He knew how to work the system. He knew how to work personalities. And he was a promising combat commander. But sometimes promise doesn't actually work out into reality. And this involved a string of bad decisions. Salerno, definitely badly planned. I really think it should have been timed differently and could have been to coincide more closely with the approach of the 8th Army from the toe of Italy. On the other hand, that was commanded by Bernard Law Montgomery, who was not exactly the swiftest greyhound on the track, shall we say. So timing would have been difficult, but still, it could have been planned better and have the American and the British beachheads a lot closer together for better defensive purposes. The Rapido River, futile, wasteful, and definitely a blow to his career, his blow to his reputation, I believe justifiably so, that this was an attack that never should have taken place, and should have been abandoned more quickly. Casino, not really his decision. This was more Wilson's. And I got to side with Clark on this about being very hesitant. Now, he did obey orders like a good soldier. He destroyed the Abbey, or at least ordered its destruction by the Air Forces. But still, this is on his permanent record, shall we say. Anzio, again, like the landing at Salerno, he was let down by subordinates. John Lucas was he screwed this one up, but you could also argue that it wasn't well conceived, and even though he wasn't entirely to blame, Clark bears responsibility as the man at the top. This may not be fair, but neither is commanding an army. Last of all, there's Rome. I think this was at the top of the class in the Hall of Shame of bad decisions. Irresponsible, insubordinate, and looking out mainly for Clark's own interest in his press. And maybe a little bit of jealousy, too, for Eisenhower and Bradley and Montgomery invading France. He wanted his spot in the headlines too, and this should not be a consideration. This is an intrusion of personal interest, and not even really important personal interest. It's vanity, it's ego, and I really can't find a lot of excuses for this. Clark tries to form reasons more than excuses and calculated risk, but I'm not convinced. Now, if you want to look at his record, I think you also have to look at his character and personality, which go with his performance, and in some ways are determinants of it. And I find General Clark to be arrogant. Reading his memoirs, this just enforces it for me. Self-serving. He's stubborn and mulish. A general has to be confident in his decisions. He has to be firm. But you know what? There's a limit, and sometimes you have to adjust according to changing circumstances. And remember, too, the enemy always has a vote. He could also be very unpleasant with his subordinates, treating even corps commanders like wayward captains. Condescending and patronizing and disrespectful. At the same time, he could be very obsequious towards his equals and his superiors. He knew which butts to kiss. He knew who to suck up to. And it's part of his skill at playing politics. My view is that every general has to be able to play politics. And it's one of the ingredients, one of the prerequisites of getting a star on your shoulder. The more stars you have, the more politically astute you have to be. But there are limits, and Clark exceeded them. And this tendency to kiss up and even play as though the more important people were his best friends is not something that I entirely respect to the degree that he did it. Now, the best evidence of all of this comes from his book, Calculated Risk, which he published in 1948. And part of the ego comes in there in the subtitle, which is The War Memoirs of a Great American General. Calling yourself great, that is really presumptuous. It's for history to determine that you're great. Alexander the Great may be the last guy who basked in that title, and I'm not sure how many people actually called him that when he was alive. Peter the Great got that title after he was dead. Catherine the Great was called the Great by enemies and allies out of respect. She didn't go around trying to adopt that name for herself. It was assigned to her. I think that by subtitling his book with as a great American general, I think this is just ego gone off the edge. I'd like to add a personal recollection here as a contrast between General Bulger's meeting with General Clark and my own experiences with General Matthew B. Ridgway in two visits to Shadyside Academy he gave in 1978 and 79. General Ridgway retired from the Army to work at the University of Pittsburgh, and he settled in Fox Chapel, a rather upscale suburb, where he lived until his death. He was involved with Shadyside when his son attended the school before West Point. Unfortunately, Matthew Ridgway Jr. was killed after his graduation from West Point, and the general settled into kind of a reclusive lifestyle after that, with more in a state of mourning. But he came back. He became a lot more active in causes with the University of Pittsburgh, with West Point, and also with Shadyside. And he came to visit us twice. First time in 1978 when I was a junior. He appeared. He spoke at a school assembly for upperclassmen at in the Memorial Hall Auditorium, which is now it's now the library, but it was an auditorium then. There were no strictures about what you can talk about, what you can ask them, and what you can't. We were just told, be respectful. There was a lot more trust than those kids from the Citadel got with General Clark. And I'll say this, General Ridgway was a lot less sensitive about his parentage or his background or any of the battles that he won. I can't really think of any that he lost. But he seemed a lot more secure. I'll say one thing, he was an old man in a brown suit, and he didn't belong in a brown suit. He belonged, as you see him here, after he took over the 8th Army in Korea after Walton Walker's death in a traffic accident, where he earned the title Old Iron Tits. That's because the legend that he carried 2 grenades on his webbing, even though here he's a lieutenant general. You only see 1 grenade on his right shoulder, on the right side of his chest. The other one, not a grenade. On the left side, that's a first aid kit. He was very concerned about the troops, I would say, based on Clark's record, more so than just about anybody else, far more than Clark. He was known for his concern for the enlisted man, and I think absolutely an outstanding individual from what I saw. And again, he trusted us. And a lot of the kids in that room were very anti-military. Some of them were just plain ignorant. I remember a classmate saying, "What does that old guy know about the Army that he can tell us?" And I think I said something a lot more than you'll ever know, dumbass. We had peaceniks in the group. We had genuine pacifists. We had Quakers. And he answered all the questions. I think that people did show him respect in 1978, and it was pleasant enough for him to come back in 1979. So he didn't just visit us once, he visited twice. And I'm not sure how many more visits he made after that, but I was honored to talk to the man. I was honored to be in a group with him and to shake hands afterward. But I saw him not just as a far better general, but as someone who was a lot more secure with his place. And I've met other generals too over the years that really weren't so vainglorious as you see with Clark. That didn't have the arrogance, and weren't as there's an old Irish saying from my mom's side of the family, the big I am. They weren't the big I am. Everything I read in Clark's own words says, I am the big I am. There are a lot of sources out there that you can use for research. Two of the better secondary sources come from Rick Atkinson, the first two volumes of his Liberation trilogy, An Army at Dawn and The Day of Battle, which cover Clark extensively. And I'll say this, Atkinson is not a fan. Then there's Daniel P. Bulger's The Panzer Killers, the untold story of a fighting general and his spearhead tank division's charge into the Third Reich. I'm out of breath just saying that, which is about Maurice Rose and the 3rd Armored Division. And I think as far as Clark goes, the main value there is in the introduction and Bulger's recall of his meeting with General Clark. The one primary source here that I really recommend is actually Clark's own book, Calculated Risk, the War Memoirs of a Great American General. It was published in 1948. There's a paperback edition from 2007, which I read, and it's a trial. It's very egotistical, which is not surprising. My view is that all biographies and memoirs are self-serving to some degree, some more than others. All of them make the writer out to be a hero. They really diss his enemies and boost his friends. Clark's memoirs are a trial to read. But my belief is, as an historian, if you have a chance to go to the horse's mouth, or in this case maybe the horse's ass, you do so. And Calculated Risk is the horse's mouth and the other end. One of the things I found very trying was, even though it's written in 1948, when President Truman ordered the integration of the military, Clark is one of these bitter enders who remains convinced that the Army and the other armed forces can only be integrated when black soldiers, service people, had risen to the level of the white man. And he's very disparaging and condescending towards black soldiers. It doesn't read well today. Now, I've had older relatives tell me, yeah, this is the way everybody thought. Well, President Truman didn't think so. Even though privately he was racist, his private correspondence about black people uses the N-word an awful lot. And when it comes to Jews, the K-word appears frequently. But in public and as a matter of deed, he integrated the military, and he was the first head of state to recognize the state of Israel. So that is definitely something. I think that the deed outweighs the word in terms of President Truman. Another essential volume to read is Sicily to the Alps, from the Center of Military History. This is the Army's official history of the war in Italy, and I think you can do a lot worse than starting with the Green Books. Just don't end there. They are a little dated in some cases. The fact that they were written early, and you have to read more updated sources that usually involve the ultra secret and the ultra decrypts, which are not going to be mentioned in any of the Army's Green Books. It also has the benefit, though, of being a free download from the Center of Military History site. And believe me, I've been downloading them all. As promised, let's look at the war games. Being a war gamer, I have to talk about them. The first one that I think most war gamers have played by now is Anzio from Avalon Hill. Even though Anzio is the name, it covers the entire war on the boot of Italy, from the Allied invasions through the very end in the Po Valley in 1945. Has a great order of battle. It's very interesting. The graphics and the systems are definitely from the late 60s, early 70s. even with a massive upgrade and update years later by Tom Olson, who is a steadfast fan of the game. That's the one that I have. I don't have the original with Mussolini's ugly face staring out from it. Instead, here's what you can always tell this version because it has outstanding cover art by the late Roger B. McGowan, who is both a very good friend and a supporter of Line of Departure, and for my money, the premier graphic artist in wargaming alongside Redmond Simonson, also deceased, of SPI fame. Roger has always been my favorite cover artist, especially. And of all his work, this is up there, in my view, although the very, very best, in my opinion, is the brooding Napoleon on the cover of Struggle of Nations on the War of German Liberation in 1813, also from Avalon Hill. But Roger will be sorely missed. Salerno 43 is from GMT, and I reviewed this on Line of Departure, and yes, Line of Departure, the magazine, is still being published. It's just that I spend way too much time working, but I really like Salerno 43. It follows Mark Simonich's World War II system with locking zone with zone of control blocks, ZOC blocks, and it's a very good operational system, which I have always enjoyed. And Salerno 43 is a very good introduction to the system. It's fairly small, has a smaller footprint, and it's balanced. The Germans can actually win this one, unlike just about all the Normandy games you're going to see. Now, Italy 43, also from GMT and by the same designer, Mark Semenich, is not on the shelves yet. It's at the printers. But I know this game well because my friend Alan Snyder and I play tested it over Vassal. He's in northern Thailand, I'm north of Pittsburgh, so we weren't like going to get together or nothing. So we play tested this for months. The October scenario, October 43, which covers the Allied advance north from Naples up the coast and up the boot, is more freewheeling. The Germans have a hard time holding the Americans and British back. I played the Germans, so I knew how hard that was. And the November scenario is more of a World War I slugging match up through the mountains, one hex at a time, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Still very interesting. And of course, there's a campaign game as well. This is one that when it comes out, it's at the printers now, as I said. Please go out and feel free to buy it. It's very good. I can highly, highly recommend it. And I'm looking forward, too, to the chance to play test the next volume in this system, which is going to be ANSI 044. Oh, goody, goody. So this is going to be 3 operational level games covering the great battles and campaigns of Mark Wayne Clark, as well as Smiling Albert Kesselring. Definitely, I can recommend the ones that are out. I can recommend the one that isn't. And these it should be in your library alongside Anzio. So that's my presentation for today. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And if you did, feel free to like and subscribe and share the video. And tell your friends. Subscribe to my channel. Recommend it if you can do so in good conscience to others. And if you're a student of World War II, you're a student of American history, you can use this as a research source. It's why I do just about all the videos that I do. It's as a teaching and learning tool. So I hope that you got something out of it, and stay tuned for further developments and more videos. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.